Hello and welcome to Tech Deals Part 2 of the Ryzen 5 5600X First Thoughts. This time I'm responding to your comments and feedback in the first video and clarifying my thoughts and providing some further explanation. This is Ghost Recon Breakpoint 1440p high detail, and I'm going to go ahead and spoil it right up front for you so you don't have to wait for the end. The average frame rate across 35 minutes of gameplay was 134 frames per second, and the 1% low was 78 frames per second. So 134 and 78 at 1440p high detail with an RTX 3080 on a Ryzen 5 5600X. Just to get that out of the way so you don't have to wait to the end if that's what you came here for. But what I'm really here to do is to address some of the comments, some of the criticism, some of the feedback, some of the ideas and suggestions, and the alternative viewpoints that were brought up in the first video. Now, I appreciate all of you guys. I really do. And many of you have some very helpful, interesting, useful things to say. Some of you have some not very helpful, useful, interesting things to say. I do take to heart. I hope everybody hears me here. If you come at me with a constructive idea, a constructive criticism, a logical, thought-out argument for why you disagree with me either in a certain circumstance, or you think I got something wrong, or there's another point of view, or there's information I didn't include, I am all ears. I've made a lot of changes to the channel in the past 4 years based upon viewer feedback. A simple example is 1% lows. I spent the first 2.5 years of my channel doing minimum, maximum, and average frame rates. And after resisting it for a while, thinking, it's a little bit more than benchmarking. I've been doing it this way for a while. I don't really need to change. Enough of you gave feedback. Of course, some of you just called names and criticized, but a number of you gave feedback and reasonings as to why it's helpful and appreciative, and so I made that change. And for the past year, I've been very consistent about doing it. So I do listen to feedback. The other thing is my tone and verbiage in the first video might have come across as, shall we say, just a touch harsh. Now, this is going to sound like an excuse. This is really going to sound like an excuse. However, I had been up for 18 hours when I voiced over that video, and I sort of didn't have my usual diplomacy in it. That doesn't make me wrong. It made me undiplomatic. So in that regard, I apologize. Never record a voiceover when you've been up for 18 hours. I was tired, I was cranky, and I had sort of stopped caring at that point, and I'm like, why doesn't everybody just listen to me? Well, if I have to yell at people to get them to listen to me, then my argument's not very good, so we're not going to do that this time around. The first comment I want to address is from True Casual. Still rocking the 7700K and the 1070 Ti because my Steam library's backlog is so big I won't be needing an upgrade anytime soon. This is a really good point, and it's a fair thing to consider whenever you're discussing new shiny things. The truth of the matter is, an awful lot of people do not need a new shiny thing if you've got a large back catalog of games to play. The true deal, the true value in gaming is to run 2 to 3 year old games on 2 to 3 year old hardware purchased when it's either on sale, Black Friday, or some other special day, or it's acquired secondhand, and you can keep it for more years because if you're running several-year-old games, then you definitely don't need brand new hardware. A good example is the game we're watching right here. Ghost Recon Breakpoint is quite demanding. Its predecessor, Ghost Recon Wildlands, is less demanding. Ghost Recon Wildlands runs great on a 4-core 8-thread chip. It runs nicer on 6 cores, 12 threads, but it really has no use for 8. 6 is lovely. 4 is fine. Whereas Ghost Recon Breakpoint, 6 is fine and 8 is lovely. And so basically just added 2 cores to the count. And if you're willing to run a couple of years old games, then that's a deal. Next up, we have Danny with, frankly, my primary problem with the Ryzen 5 5600X, which is the price. I don't dislike this CPU. I think it's awesome. I just think it's too expensive. Danny says 250 max would be ideal for this CPU. I'm happy with my 2600 for a little while longer. Great video as always. Thank you. Yes, price. It's just price, price, price. If a Ryzen 5 5600 non-X had launched for $199 and a Ryzen 5 5600X had launched for $249, then problem solved. All of my complaints, well, not all of my complaints. I mean, obviously, free would be nice, but free is not realistic now, is it? That's my issue, is $300. AMD had a price increase. Yes, the CPUs are great. Yes, I know. We'll get to that. Price. That's my single biggest complaint. Lower the price, and I'll be screaming from the rooftops at how great these chips really are. Next up, we have a dual comment from For an Angel. First, just got finished watching one of Tech's old videos and then watching this one. The difference is like night and day. The new Tech is so much more condescending and nasty. Watching the old Tech used to actually be enjoyable. Fair enough. I understand what you're saying. I apologize for that in the previous video. It's a really crappy excuse to say I've been up for 18 hours, and to be honest, some of the Twitter comments and some of the other things have started to get to me, and I let it get under my skin, and so for that, I apologize to all of you. That being said, let me address For an Angel's second point, which is P.S. The 5600X doesn't just beat the 10700K, it beats the 10900K that costs twice as much. Well, yeah, hold on a second. It does and it doesn't. Let's discuss this objectively, because even though you're only seeing this, I've already done a bunch of benchmarking. I've already recorded 8 different games on the RTX 3080 on the Ryzen 5 5600X, and I've done them on the i9 10900K, and so on and so forth. In a perfect, pure benchmarking environment, yes, a stock Ryzen 5 5600X will beat an i9 10900K in some games. It doesn't beat them in all, but it's really, really close, and it does beat them in some. Having said that, this implies a situation where you'll never use more than 6 cores, which is true on a clean machine with everything turned off and OneDrive and G Drive aren't syncing, and you're not listening to music, you're not using Discord, you're not live streaming, you don't have a second monitor, you're not watching a Twitch stream or watching YouTube videos. And I know not all of you do that. I get that. I ran a Twitter poll about 2 weeks ago that indicated it was about a 50-50 split between those who were watching on one monitor, or gaming on one monitor, and who were gaming on 2. And so I'm basing my advice on the fact that I have to take into account people who are using 2 monitors. So in terms of benchmarking, yes. In terms of real-world use, I'm firmly of the belief that people do more with their computers than just play a video game. So that's why I think that more cores are more useful, regardless of what a quote-unquote benchmark on a clean, perfect test bench in ideal conditions might show. Next up, we have a comment from Kablosh, or is it Kabloosh? Or, well, I'm from Texas. Everybody's Bob Stewart or Kevin to me. I apologize. Man, I've been running with a 6700K for the past 4 years, and I've put in a 2070 Super earlier this year, and I feel like I'm doing fine. I feel like I could easily last another year with the 6700K for all the games he is talking about. That said, I'm fine with not maxing out settings, and my monitor is a 1440p 75Hz monitor. Oh boy. You know what? I don't ever want to make somebody's computer experience wrong. I really don't. If you're happy with your experience, great. Rock on. Be happy. Use it. You know, the best value computer you're ever going to have is the one you have in front of you. That being said, I am overrun by comments from viewers on YouTube, on Discord, and on Twitter. I tweet them. I post them about people who have this sort of hardware. Man, 4 cores was all I needed. Oh my God, I just upgraded to 8 and what a difference it makes. And of course, sometimes I'll respond to them and say, your frame rate's not really that much faster, isn't it? Like, no, but it's so much smoother. I said, had no idea, did you? And they're like, no, I thought I was fine. Because that's what you're used to. Now, I understand somebody's going to come into the comments and say, well, I did that exact thing. I upgraded to 8 cores and it made no difference whatsoever. Well, everybody's different and your circumstances may be different. I get comments every single day without fail across the various platforms from viewers who did upgrade from 4 cores to 8 cores and they're flabbergasted. Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Battlefield 5 multiplayer. They say, I thought my computer was great. There wasn't a problem. My games were playable. But I didn't know how much frames stutter and how much input lag I had until I went to 8. And it's like I have a whole new computer. I have had people, now granted, this is more from coming from 4 cores, 4 threads. It would be like a 6600K instead of 6700K. But I've had people describe going from 4 cores, 4 threads to 8 core, 16 threads to feeling almost, I emphasize the almost, like moving from an SSD to a hard drive. It's like they could suddenly breathe. They didn't even know how trapped they were. And they started playing Call of Duty Warzone on an 8 core, 16 thread chip from a 4 core, 4 thread chip. And they're like, why did nobody tell me? And I'm like, we've been telling you. And they're like, but it doesn't show because the i7 from 5 years ago benchmarks really well. And it does. The 1% low and the average frame rate aren't terrible compared to new chips. But the experience of using them is a different thing. I'm trying to say this without screaming and yelling because it really is amazing. I went from a 6 core to an 8 core chip machine at home personally, and I can tell the difference, and I'm not uber competitive. It's there. Granted, 2 monitors, multitasking, but it's not my content creation machine, it's my personal gaming machine. I would never in a million years go back to 6 cores. So there's that. Strong Arm John Entertainment comes in with, these 5,000 CPUs all perform about the same at 1440p and 4K. Yes, they do. If you're doing nothing else and you're playing currently released games. That is a correct statement. A Ryzen 9 5900X 12-core 24-thread chip will not benchmark any faster than a Ryzen 5 5600X on a clean test bench playing any of these current games. The reason why I recommend a Ryzen 9 5900X is not to do that scenario. If that's really all you're doing, if you come to me and said, look, man, I just want to play current games. I'm not dying to play the new ones. I don't multitask. I don't have a second monitor. I don't care about any of that. I don't live stream. You know, a Ryzen 5 5600X will do that, sure. On the other hand, my advice is designed to be forward-looking in nature, and it's designed to account for the fact that you want to play future games with a little bit of stuff going on. You don't want to have to close every game launcher. You don't want to have to close your OneDrive and G Drive. You don't have to close your backup and disable Windows Update. And I'm assuming that you don't want to have to go and turn everything off. Maybe you're listening to music. Maybe you've got Discord voice chat running. The extra cores and threads make a difference in terms of frame pacing and frame delivery, not in frame rate. It is not going to affect your benchmark so much as it's going to make it a more enjoyable experience to use your computer. But unfortunately, there is no chart I can put on the screen that shows smoothness and enjoyment of using your computer. It's how well does it task switch? How well does it switch songs? How well can you live stream? Yeah, you can benchmark that to some extent, but I've tried, and it's inconsistent at best. It's not very repeatable. Any benchmark I do needs to be repeatable. And trying to load up the computer with other tasks, I found to be an extremely variable process, and I get a completely different result every time I do it. So if I do it 3 times in a row, that's not a benchmark. I cannot publish a video if I cannot repeat the results repeatedly. So there's that. Zax comes in with a very nice comment. I appreciate the lack of fanboyism clickbait in the title and thumbnail like most tech YouTubers are doing. Well, I've never been a big fan of clickbait, to be completely honest. Oh, check this video out. It'll show you one cool trick to do with your video card. Oh my goodness, you'll never believe what happens next. I hate that stuff. I don't want to say that I'm like, a Vulcan or something. I mean, obviously I have my emotions and feelings, but I try to stick to the facts, and I try to say things that I know to be true, or at least to be true in a reasonable set of circumstances. They may not be true 100% of the time due to, obviously, workloads are different and circumstances, and what are you doing with your computer is obviously different. But I try to make sure that everything I say has a basis of truth to it, and if asked for further details, I can immediately launch into, well, it's this circumstance and it's doing this, this, and this. The reason why I recommend a Ryzen 9 is because 3 years forward looking, I believe, in my opinion, based upon having done this for a long time, that games will need more over the next 3 years. Now, if you come back to me and say, I disagree with that statement, that's okay. I don't have a crystal ball. It's in the shop getting repaired. What can I say? And my magic 8-ball is fuzzy. It says ask again later. So if you don't believe that games will need more than 6 cores in the next 3 years in order to run smoothly, that's okay. You can believe that. We'll just agree to disagree, and we'll find out in 3 years exactly what happened. Vero Skies comes in with just got an i9 9900K for $300 at that, probably the Micro Center deal, to pair with my RTX 3080. 6 cores got destroyed in Warzone, and now I'm running at 40 to 50% on the i9. Gonna wait 3 years and 2 generations of GPU for my next upgrade for it to be worth it. I'm 100% on board with that plan. If you can get an i9 9900K for $300, run, don't walk, and buy that. That is the deal in terms of performance. The i9, for those of you who don't memorize every processor on the market, I understand, is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU that fits into 300 series Intel motherboards, Z390 motherboards, for example. It'll also install on Z370 with a BIOS update if you have one of those. It runs at 4.7 gigahertz all-core turbo out of the box, which is basically the same speed as our Ryzen 5 5600X here. Now, I completely acknowledge, core-to-core, clock-to-clock, the Ryzen 5 5600X is faster than the i9 9900K. If you run Cinebench, if you run 7-zip, if you run Blender, if you do direct CPU core-to-core comparisons at the same clock speed, Zen 3 is faster than the i9 9900K is, and the i9 10900K for that matter. However, they're really close, and the i9 has exactly 0 problems going to 5 gigahertz. All you do is turn on MCE or multi-core enhancement in the BIOS, and it will instantly go to 5 gigahertz on all the cores and threads. Now, some Ryzens will do that and some won't. I haven't done a lot of extensive overclock testing yet, but it's something we'll certainly take a look at in the future. But I can verify you it's very easy. I have 3 different i9, well, I did have 3 different, I have 2 at the moment, but I had 3 i9 9900Ks, all of which ran at stock voltage, stock settings at 5 gigahertz, all core without any complaint. Noctua NHD 15 coolers, you can do a little bit less. You don't need those, but they're very nice and they're very cool running. And you have a no fuss situation. I would also like to point out, and apologies to all the AMD fanboys in advance, but if you buy at this point in 2020 a Z390 motherboard with an i9 9900K, it's solid as a rock. The BIOS updates are secure. It supports all the RAM. It's exactly a 0 fuss installation and configuration. A brand new Zen 3 on a brand new board with a brand new BIOS update may or may not be that. While the i9 will be a little bit slower on a per core basis, don't underestimate the value of going from 6 cores to 8 cores. Again, I did that at home. I had an i7 8700K and I went to an i9 9900K. Exactly same per core, per clock performance. The difference was dramatic. Again, I have 2 monitors. Again, I multitask when I game. I watch YouTube videos and Twitch streams and stuff while I'm playing games. I have my G drive and OneDrive syncing. Well, they're not constantly syncing, but they're in the background. Occasionally they check and do their server thing. The difference in games like Ghost Recon Breakpoint between 6 cores and 8 cores in that configuration is dramatic and noticeable. I don't need a benchmark chart to be able to pick it out blindly and go, oh, there it is right there. There's the difference. It's not frame rate. It's smoothness and system responsiveness that really makes the difference. Wookiees coming in. Is it Wookiees? Wookiees? Whatever. Nah, this 6-core has as much processing power as the previous Gen 8 cores. Maybe the i7 edges it out on full multi-threaded, but as always, many games will value single-threaded so much I expect the 5600X to win out anyway. Well, here's the thing. That's both a true statement and it misses the point that I was trying to make. A Ryzen 7 3700X Zen 2 is actually still faster and multi-threaded than the 5600X, but not by much. It's really close. I have run that test. I've got actually the charts already made. That's going to be the next video that's coming up very shortly, is 3700X versus 5600X, because everybody wants to see it. So I did it. The 8-core 3700X is still faster and multi-threaded, but it's so close, I actually mentally count that as a wash. It's not faster by enough to make a huge difference. Single core, yes, absolutely positively, the 5600X is noticeably faster in single core performance over the 3700X. Here's the problem. 6 fast cores will give you a high frame rate. You're seeing it right here. But what it will not do is give you great multitasking performance. And this is perhaps a subject that doesn't get enough nuance because usually it's a Twitter reply or a YouTube comment or it's a comment in a live stream, and it never gets quite the sort of detailed answer it deserves. So let me take a step back a second and see if I can say this very, very clearly so you guys can understand where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to say. Multi-threaded performance and multitasking performance are not the same thing. Multi-threaded performance is the raw multiple thread computational performance of a CPU per core times the number of cores and threads. In theory, at the same clock speed, a Ryzen 9 5900X should have exactly double the multi-threaded performance of a Ryzen 5 5600X. It is in fact exactly 2 Ryzen 5 5600Xs in one. That's literally what it is underneath the die. There's 2 chiplets instead of 1. Each one of them has 6 cores. That's exactly what it is. In reality, it doesn't quite work out that way due to a variety of latency factors and memory access factors, but it's really close. That's multi-threaded performance. If you're running Blender, if you're doing video rendering, if you're playing a video game, if you're playing a video game that will use 6 cores, such as Ghost Recon Breakpoint here absolutely will, then your 6-core performance matters if you want a high frame rate. We are currently getting a higher frame rate than a Ryzen 7 3700X will give. Spoiler alert, by more than just a couple of frames per second. We're talking about like 20-something frames per second. It is a noticeable difference. However, with the game running at this frame rate, it's using all the chip. There's nothing left to do any other tasks. There's no spare cores. On a Ryzen 7 3700X, if you are multitasking, if you have 2 monitors, if there's background tests running, does Windows Update run? Does antivirus scan run? Does your OneDrive sync? Is anything going on? What happens is you'll get 20 frames per second slower, just as a round number, that's not the exact number, but let's say you get 20 frames per second slower. It'll still use 6 cores and 12 threads, leaving 2 cores open for multitasking performance, not multi-threading performance. The only way you can try to redress this on a 6-core chip in this case would be to limit the game's performance. You could set a frame rate limiter. In fact, Ghost Recon Breakpoint has one. You could set it to 120 frames per second. You could set it to 100 frames per second. An earlier comment said he had a 1440p 75 Hz monitor. Turn on VSync and force the game to 75 frames per second. This will reduce the load on the CPU, and you'll be good to go. You'll be fine. You'll have some additional performance, and Windows will just swap around tasks between the cores and threads, and it will run smoother. But you do have to limit the frame rate in order to make that work. One other point that I'd like to mention here. Notice that the graphics card is not running at 100%. We're CPU bound. The RTX 3080 is limited in frame rate on a Zen 3 Ryzen 5 5600X CPU. I'm going to do a follow-up when I get them. I don't have them yet as of the time of this recording. I do not yet have a Ryzen 7 5800X, and I do not have a Ryzen 9 5900X I do have a 5800X coming in a couple of days. I will follow this video up with a Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, Ryzen 9 comparison in Ghost Recon Breakpoint, in this resolution and detail setting, in this configuration, to show you how much more CPU to use, either how much more frame rate it has, or how much reserve cores it has available for multitasking. What I perhaps brushed over in my previous video was not in respecting the fact that not everyone cares. Some people legit are like, look, I just want to play game, man. I don't want all that stuff. I've got one really nice monitor. I just turn all the stuff off, and I just want to enjoy my game. Fair enough. In this case, don't buy an RTX 3080 to play at 1440p high detail, because it's kind of a waste of money, as you can see right here. Even at times, a 3070 might be bottlenecked on this configuration. Not as much, but it would be. So I'm going to call it here. I think I've answered enough questions. There was over 700 comments, so obviously I can't get to them all. If I didn't get to yours, it wasn't personal. It's just, there just comes a point where I think I've made the point. Hopefully you guys appreciate my approach in this particular video, putting the questions up on the screen and softening my wordage a little bit, which I acknowledge was a little bit harsh in the first video, so my apologies for that. Comments down below. Let me know what you thought of this. Let me know what you have, what you use, what you think of all this. And I will follow up with a comparison between Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, and Ryzen 9 just as soon as I get them. And I will follow up with a Zen 2 versus Zen 3 video here in a couple of days. Like I said, those benchmarks are run. I just haven't put together the video and done all that stuff yet. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and all the usual stuff. I will see all of you next time.